Your thoughts on how far Israel is prepared to go here and to what extent the U.S. will follow?
Look, Middle East wars either happen because they're well planned, 1956, 1973, or they're at the end of a long fuse of tensions, which takes a mass casualty event, a miscalculation, to set off an escalatory cycle into a full-scale war. It's the latter scenario, clearly, that everyone fears. I don't think the Israelis, the IDF right now, wants a major escalation with Hezbollah, which could trigger the use of their 150,000 inventory of high trajectory weapons of varying ranges and lethalities and precisions, which cover most of Israel, which would mean this would be a war on the Hezbollah side of attacks against civilian urban centers and infrastructure. And I'm not sure the Israelis want to mount the kind of operation in an effort to crush or set back Hezbollah's military capacity for years by launching an air, ground, and sea operation, which will demolish Lebanese infrastructure and likely kill thousands of Lebanese. So the real question, with all respect to John Kirby, I don't think the issue is diplomacy. The question is whether or not the balance of power that Hezbollah and Israel have been engaged in, the sort of deterrence, will work this time. The Israelis will have to demonstrate qualitatively and quantitatively that what they're going to be doing in the wake of this devastating attack against a Druze town in the Golan Heights is more than they've done before without tripping or triggering the escalatory cycle, which I think everyone, maybe with the possibility of Yahya Sinwar, the architect of the October 7 terror surge, with the exception of Sinwar, I don't think anybody wants this.
Well, Aaron, since you raised the prospect of Sinwar and Hamas in all of this, how should we consider the fact that ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas are ongoing in Rome in the backdrop to all of this, and how that's likely to influence the way both Israel and Hezbollah move forward?
Yeah, it's a very good question. From my experience over the last 20 plus years of negotiating, Middle East negotiations tend to have two speeds, slow and slower. And the fact is, what has been missing from this negotiation, with the exception of the Biden administration that feels plenty of urgency, is urgency on the part of the government of Israel and Hamas to actually make the decisions necessary, and they're hard and tough decisions for each of them, that would allow at least phase one, which would be a 6-week ceasefire in exchange for a limited number of hostages, surging humanitarian assistance into Gaza, and the possibility of building on that 6-week ceasefire to contemplate a cessation of hostilities. If there isn't a deal, and if the Northern Front escalates to the point where you're talking about something the Middle East has never experienced before, a regional war replete with plunging financial markets and rising oil prices, I think that the hostage deal will be on permanent hold. If Hezbollah and Israel manage this round, I think there's a reasonable chance by the end of August, with a Knesset out of recess, and Mr. Netanyahu, should he want to do this deal now, basically immune from the government falling, I think there's a reasonable chance it could actually happen.
We spoke earlier, Aaron, on balance of power with Hagar Shamali from Greenwich Media Strategies. On both sides' motivations with consideration to Israel and Hezbollah and goals here as tensions rise. Here's what she said.
Neither side actually wants a war. And I know I've said this a number of times, and it may seem odd since you've seen these strikes go on between both sides for the last 9 months, but neither side actually wants a war. Otherwise, you would have seen them by now in a full-scale war. It's just that the pressure continues to mount more and more.
Aaron, do you agree with that take?
Smart analysis. It's been 18 years, repeat, 18 years since the summer of '06, when Hezbollah and Israel last clashed in a significant confrontation, which I might add, Hezbollah with 5,000 fighters and relatively low-tech, high-trajectory weapons shut down the northern half of Israel for 34 days. This is the Middle East's most preeminent military power. And now, given the ferocity and intensity and capacity of the Hezbollah arsenal, it would be devastating for both Israelis and Lebanese. So I think it's smart analysis. We've been through almost 11 months of controlled escalation with neither side and their prospective supporters, Iran on one hand and the United States on the other, encouraging, I think, a sort of deterrence strategy rather than a scenario that would trip into or willfully enter the kind of regional war that I think would be devastating.
Well, as we consider the role in the U.S. of all of this, Aaron, this is a question we were asking last week when Netanyahu was here in Washington giving an address to a joint session of Congress, meeting with both President Biden and separately with Vice President Kamala Harris. Because she is now the presumptive Democratic nominee, Biden has made himself a one-term president. Do you think that knowledge that Joe Biden is on his way out influences at all what's likely to happen in the Middle East?
We have one president at a time, and I don't think that the calculations with respect to this particular phase of the Israeli-Lebanese, Israel-Hezbollah conflict is going to be shaped or affected by the fact that Biden's term will conclude. But there are politics here. And I think the Israeli Prime Minister, having several sets of meetings during his visit, I mean, probably the most important from his point of view was not the meeting with Kamala Harris, not the meeting with Joe Biden, but the sort of apology tour that the Prime Minister engaged in when he went down to Mar-a-Lago. Because he knows 2016 to 2020, the Trump administration, again, I voted for Republicans and worked for Republicans and Democrats. It's not a partisan comment, it's an analytical. The Trump administration in 2016 to 2020 created what I would describe to you as a sugar high for Israel. And I think Mr. Netanyahu, even though there are tensions between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, clearly, but I think Netanyahu understands he'd probably face less pressure from a Trump administration with respect to giving the Israelis a freer hand. And remember, Mr. Netanyahu's life these days is defined by only one organizing principle: how to stay in power and beat 3 charges, bribery, fraud, and breach of trust before a Jerusalem district court, now 4 years in running. He's due to begin testifying, I believe, in December. So it seems to me Mr. Netanyahu is hedging his bets. But if he could vote in our elections, I'm pretty confident about who he'd be voting for.